It was a happy childhood. We lived in a picturesque village in Warwickshire, and we were a happy family, a strange family in a way. My father was a teetotaler, and my mother was an alcoholic, an active alcoholic. It wasn't causing too much trouble in the family and everything, but it was, nevertheless, it was there. But I have a sister, and she's just 1 year older than I am, and so everything was fine, except for me, really. I don't think I was fine, because right at the beginning of my years, the Second World War was just finishing, and all the American troops were coming home from their work, and it was a done thing in the village for all the children in the village to run up to the American forces and say, "Have you got any gum, chum?" And even at that age, I never had any chewing gum, and the reason I never had any chewing gum was I was too frightened to ask. And I was too frightened to ask because I was terrified of rejection, and it was just that simple. So they sent me across the meadows to this convent. It was at Stoneleigh Abbey, and I was terrified of the nuns when I got to this convent. And I understand, of course, that most children don't enjoy their first days at school, but with me, my emotions were off the record, really, and I just was uncomfortable. I just saw everybody else as knowing the ropes and me knowing nothing. So I used to steal little things from home to give to the other children so that they'd like me. And that started to cause a few problems. So then I had to lie about the stealing. And then that causes a few problems. But then I developed another skill which was detrimental in the long pull. I learned how to talk my way out of the trouble that the lies and the stealing was causing. So I'm 5 years old, I'm a liar, I'm a thief, and I'm plausible. That is a recipe for disaster, a recipe for disaster. So I bumbled through those few early years in the convent schools and everything, but my parents were very keen to send me away to school, and they did just that. And at the age of 12, I was sent away to boarding school. And immediately I got there, I felt exactly the same as I'd felt when I went, first of all, to the small schools. And I felt so uncomfortable that I had to really ferret around to find a way through my emotions. And at that stage, the symptoms of addiction had really kicked in a little bit, really. So I was suffering from unreasonable fears and anxieties and resentments and feelings of being different, feelings as if I didn't quite fit with my environment, always comparing how I felt with how everybody else looked. Compared two different things, my raw meat with their exterior and everything. Never ever saw anybody who looked as sensitive as I felt. I'm sure they were there, but to me, everybody looked fine. And it became so uncomfortable for me that I had to compensate. And I found a little formula that worked very well for me. I found that if I did better than everybody else, or different to everybody else, I could feel the same as everybody else. And so I particularly excelled at sport at school. I was extremely, I don't like saying it, but I was extremely talented at most sports and things like that. That got me a lot of focus. And also I was a rebel, and that got me even more focus as well. And that was the way in which I trundled through those first years until I was 18. When I left school, I was the envy of everybody I knew. I had it all. I had everything at my feet and everything. The family got plenty of money, well, I certainly got enough money and everything. Everything was going well, and I was pretty, and was pretty. Those days are gone. But anyway. Life was at my feet, and then what happened was I picked up a drink. Now, when I picked up a drink, something happened. And I didn't know anything about alcohol, really. My father was a teetotaler and disapproved of drinking at the best, obviously because of my mother's condition. But I didn't know much about alcohol other than I didn't drink. So I started to drink, first of all, just the odd half pint of shandy or beer or something like that. But when I drank, alcohol did something different to me. Now that was a problem straight away because everybody drank, and from time to time everybody got drunk from time to time and everything. So the behaviour between everybody else and me looked exactly the same. We were all doing exactly the same thing, but alcohol was actually doing something different to me. And what it was doing exactly what all the compensating had used to do when I was at school. It was covering up my inadequacies. It was making the world less threatening. It was just helping me to fit in with my environment and everything. And that was a poisonous bit of information to go into my computer, because there it stayed. And nobody knew what was going on. I hadn't got a clue what was going on because my behaviour was just the same as everybody else's. However, that's actually what was happening. And I became a drinker, and my drinking was not startling. Well, I don't think it was startling. I suppose we've all got drunk stories and things like that we can tell, but my drinking just got worse and worse and worse, well, more and more and more. And it lost its timetable in the end. I sort of went from nighttime drinking to lunchtime drinking to lunchtime and nighttime drinking, and then in the morning drinking, and in the end I was drinking, and it was just the way it was. So it was. I seemed to be coping all okay in a way. I seemed to be coping all right a way, but what was happening was I was developing a positive dependence on a drug without which I couldn't function. So I had to drink in order to feel okay. And since those many years ago, of course, but I've met many people like that need to drink in order to be able to just behave in an everyday sort of fashion and everything. And I was one of those. Very early on in my drinking, I realised I had a problem. I started to recognise that although I'd previously compared myself with other people, my drinking was starting to take a different form and a different shape. I had developed this positive cellular craving for alcohol, and I knew it was a problem. And so I tried to stop. And I almost instantly had fits when I started to stop because I was a very heavy drinker. And it's strange you should ask that, because I've never been interested in what people drink or how much they drink or when they drink it. I'm interested in what happens when they drink. And my drinking caused problems, and it was abnormal as far as I was concerned, and I recognised it pretty early on. I knew there was a need for me not to drink. And so in the early days of trying not to drink, I could get away with it and just feel bad for a few days and then maybe do a month or two without drinking. But then I pick up a drink, and we've heard this a million times, in a relatively short space of time it was worse than it was before. But I crossed into this business of I couldn't survive without a drink. Did it cause any problems? Just a few. Just a few. So, I've been married 3 times. I've been divorced 3 times. I've been bankrupt twice. I've squandered most of the family money and everything like that. I've been in and out of rehabs and things for years and everything. So if you ever see me with a drink in my hand, please don't get me to an AA meeting or anything like that. I need to get into a hospital because I cannot stop. Once I start drinking, I cannot stop. And and how I learned that, of course, was the hard way, because it was, I used to have fits when I used to try and stop drinking. Obviously, you would have guessed now that I have been trying to stop drinking for years and years and years, and failing miserably all the time and everything. So in the end, I just had to drink in order to be able to function. It wouldn't be right for me to just skid over the damage it did to other people as well, because the damage it did to me was, you hear it all the time, I suppose, really, but that was bad enough. That was bad enough. It didn't come close to the damage I did to the people that cared about me. I walked through their lives as if they didn't exist, as if they didn't exist. I couldn't care less about the damage I'd done. I was almost operating like a psychopath in a way, and my conscience had gone out of the window completely. I've seen that a lot with addiction and the loss of consciousness. But in amongst all that, what also goes with addiction, when we're talking about me really, is the ability to love. It's completely absent. I have passions. I used to have passions, but I've seen so much of it now over the years and everything. The addict is incapable of being other-centered, and I was exactly that. I couldn't care less about other people. So my interpretation of love was, you love me, so therefore everything's all right, you know. But loving people in my book today is putting other people on a higher plane than oneself. And but not so in those days. So my life was riddled with lies and fears and anxieties and cheating, and it's worth mentioning on the lies that over the year I've experienced something far worse than a lie is a half-truth. A lie, you can explode it with truth. You can get to the bottom of that. But a half-truth, you don't know where you are. And the manipulative side of me used to put myself in that position where I could tell lies, which were actually a half-truth, where they weren't actually going anywhere with that. So I'd still got that escape strategy there for the sort of behaviour. And I was well practiced at that. And I lived that way. I knew I had to do something about it, and it got so bad in the end that I was. It was a situation sort of developed really. I hadn't had a drink for 10 months, and I picked up a drink after 10 months, and in 4 days, I was lying on the floor of a public convenience in Stratford-on-Avon, and I couldn't get up. I couldn't get up. I was so ill. And there was a man, he tried to help me up, and I remember clawing up the brass pipe in the corner of this lavatory and thinking, Jesus, this has got to stop, you know, I can't go on like this and everything. And I had a friend, and he was a blacksmith, and I managed to get into a restaurant, and there was a phone box which I knew in the restaurant, and I called him and I said, you've got to come and get me, because I'm in a mess here. And he did. He came and he got me, and he chucked me in the back of his Land Rover, and he took me back to where his forge was and all that sort of thing, and his wife looked after me and cleaned me up. I was in a terrible mess and everything. And I said, you've got to find somewhere for me to go now, because I'm going to have fits before long. And he said, well, I've run out of places and everything with you and everything. And but we both had a mutual friend who was a GP, but he was on holiday at the moment, so there was a locum there, and the locum found somewhere, and he found this hospital, and he said, yeah, they'll have me. And so he chucked me in the back of his Land Rover once more and took me to this hospital, this clinic. And just dumped me there, really. And I remember being in this detox bay at this hospital, and I could hear him talking to the nurses outside. And he came into the detox bay. He said, "I'm going now," and he was crying. And he said, "I don't like saying this to you, but you do this to me once more." And he said, "I'm not going to be here for you. I'm not going to be here." And I knew he meant it. I knew he meant it. And he was so important to me. We'd grown up together and we'd drunk together. We'd done everything together, you know. He went and I stayed. And when I came through detox, I got into the restaurant, and I remember there's a woman there called Fane, and she was we were having an evening meal, and she said you're going to run away after you've finished the meal, aren't you? I said yeah, I've been in all these sort of places, and she said, "Don't go, just stay and talk to me for the night and everything." I said, no. She said, "Not for you." She said, "For me." She said, "I'm terrified, and I need somebody to talk to, and during the evening, and I'm just feel dreadful about this place." And so I said, "Oh, okay." And she said, "Go in the morning." And I said, "All right, yeah, okay, I'll stay, and I'll go in the morning." And so breakfast, she was there again, and she said, "Are you going after breakfast?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I've got a £5 note in my shoe, which I always put in for these treatment centres and things like that. So I got a taxi to get out. So I said, "Yes, I'm off." She said, well, there's an AA meeting in the canteen this morning, and why don't you come to the AA meeting with me and go afterwards?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, all right." And I'd been to AA many times before and everything. So I went to the AA meeting with her, and there was a man taking a chair there. And I'd never seen him either before or since. But he started to tell his story. And when he was telling his story, he was in a strange sort of way, he was telling my story. It was almost identical to my story. And he finished his story by saying, so that there was an explanation for why he had to live his life that way, and it wasn't his fault. There was something wrong with him. And then I thought, in my sick mind, I thought, well, if there's something wrong with me, then it could be put right. So I decided, I'm going to just stay and see what this is all about. So I stayed. And I was there for 4 weeks in the end. I stayed there for 4 weeks, and I haven't had a drink from that day to this, and that was many years ago. But I went through a total program of abstinence with this treatment centre, and critical as ever about the counsellors and all that sort of stuff that you see in these sort of places. And I think I could do this job better than you, and all that sort of sick thinking that was going on with me at the time and everything. But anyway, I haven't had a drink since then. So I left there. And one of the things that they did at this treatment centre was they used to invite ex-patients back to talk to the patients that were still in treatment about how they got back to work, how they got back in their families after they'd left treatment and all that, the difficulties that they were experiencing. And I was one of the people they invited to go back, and I went back a few times. And anyway, cut a long story short, the first time I went there, and I did a group, when I was leaving there, I was driving home from there, and I knew that was what I wanted to do for a living. I knew that's what I wanted to do for a living. That feeling of fulfillment that I'd never experienced in my life, ever. But that feeling was a great feeling. So I started to look for jobs in the treatment world, and of course there were very few treatment centres around at the time. and everything, and I wasn't getting on very well with that, but I was trying to run my business at the same time and everything. But this part is very important to me because things started to change. Now, when I speak about this, it's very important I'm talking about my story now. This doesn't apply to everybody, but this certainly applied to me. When I stopped drinking, my life got worse, not better. It got worse. There was a sudden surge of euphoria when I got free of alcohol and everything sort of came back together a little bit. My head was clear. I knew what I was doing, sort of thing, on a more daily basis. But nothing had changed. The only significance between me and the rest of the world for 2 years after I'd stopped drinking was that I wasn't drinking. That was the only difference. Nothing else had changed. I still had the fears, the anxieties, the resentments. I was still lying, cheating, borrowing Peter to pay Paul, behaving dishonestly in business deals and things like that, and everything. Nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. And I owed a lot of money, and 3 suppliers of my business had stopped supplying me because I hadn't paid their bills. So I thought, I'll get my plausible head on, and I'll go and see these 3 pliers, and I'll talk them straight round. And so that's exactly what I did. On one day, I got into my car. First thing in the morning, I drove to Sunbury-on-Thames, and I gave this guy a story that'd make a crocodile cry, and he said, "Oh, of course, I didn't realise you'd be struggling like that. You know, of course, please pay. You know, let the supply the goods, in other words, was what I'm saying." So I thought, fine, right. Then I had to drive to Chesterfield, and I drove to Chesterfield, and I got into this other supplier's office, and I told him the same story. No problem. And I thought, well, that'll do nicely. So I drove across the moors to the potteries, and I stopped on the Staffordshire moors and had a nice lunch, and got to this place in the potteries where I was going for the 3rd of the 3 people. And I was telling the same story, plausible story, to this chap. And sort of halfway through, I thought, this isn't going so well, you know. And anyway, cut a long story short, I finished my spiel. And this chap said, "I have to tell you that I'm not going to help. But the reason I'm not going to help is that my company employ me to look after their best interests, not yours." And he said, "So get out of the mess." And he said, "Come back and we'll talk, you know, but I'm not going to be a party to it," and everything. And I knew then that my world was about to fall in big time, because I couldn't operate without him. I didn't know what to do with myself, and I drove down the M6 that day, and it was a Friday afternoon, and it was in the summer. It was blistering hot, and I drove down at about 40 miles an hour, and all these vans and cars were going past, back to their families at the weekend. They were all going to have a lovely time and all that, and I was going bust big time, you know. And I got back home. I was between marriages at the time, and every Friday night I used to go to an AA meeting at the Lions Club in Stratford-on-Avon. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I'll go to this meeting. Now, how shall I position myself in this meeting tonight to get the best effect out of these people? That, you know, should I look miserable so they'd ask me what's wrong? Or, you know, should I just tell them what a terrible day I've had and everything like that? And the answer that came back changed my life. The answer that came back from somewhere, I was sitting in this car park outside the Lions Club in Stratford-on-Avon, and the answer I got to that question was, if these people care about you as much as you care about them, then you don't stand a chance. Because I couldn't have cared less about anybody else's problems. I couldn't have cared less about their divorces, their bankruptcies, their debts, their sick children, sick parents. I couldn't care less. I knew how to look as if I cared, but I couldn't care less. And I went almost cold all over, and I thought, my God, it's me. I'm the problem here. I'm the problem. It's not these people. It's not everybody else in the world, it's me. I thought, God damn it, I've got to change this. I've got to change this. So I went into the meeting, and it was one of those meetings where they ask you to share, and then they asked me to share, and I didn't. I said no, and which was strange because I was always talking like that, you know. And then I got out of that meeting, and I thought, I've got to get a sponsor. And one of the trips that I'd had abroad in America to Atlanta, I'd met a guy called Seamus Hickey. And Seamus Hickey was a doctor from Blackheath, and he was in many years of recovery. And I thought, I'm going to ask him to be my sponsor. And so before I asked him to be my sponsor, but I need to explain to you that I'd already imagined a sponsor. I told everybody in AA I got a sponsor. I go to AA meetings, I say, we're having a terrible time with my sponsor at the moment. He's making me do this. He didn't exist. I invented this guy. I just invented him just so that it would make a good story and everything. And that was part of my sickness, that I just always had to be impressing people with, you know, the work that I was doing and everything. Still never drank, but the behaviour was terrible, absolutely terrible. So I asked Seamus, and he said, yeah. He said, yeah, I'll be your sponsor, but I'm just going to explain a few things to you. He said, first of all, what we've got to do is we've got to break down the barriers that are preventing you from knowing who you really are. And I said, okay. And he said, and that's going to sting a bit. You're not going to like that. He said, but we're going nowhere unless we can do that. And he said, so I want you to change a few things in your life at the moment. And one of the things I want you to change is the AA meeting that you go to at the moment. I'm not asking you to ignore your friends or anything like that, but I just want you to go to some different meetings. So I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, if you go to some different meetings, he said, you'll find there's always a nucleus of people at every meeting you go to in the world. There's always a nucleus of people that have got a sparkle in their eye. And he said, those are the people you want to stay next to. Those are the people that indirectly have got your recovery in the palms of their hand. And he said, if you do that, you're not going to go far wrong. He said, but if you were to ask any of them how they managed to get that sparkle in their eye, they would all say the same thing. They would all say that it was because they found a way of breaking down the barriers that had prevented them from knowing who they really were. And I came out of that first original meeting with Seamus, and I knew my life was going to change. I just knew that was a significant point in my life, and it did change. I came out of the water like a water skier. Everything started to come into shape and everything, and of course went bust when that was happening, but I was coping. I coped with it all right. Today my life is manageable, productive and happy. And before, it was the exact opposite. It was the absolute opposite. And so I've come to believe, and you hear an awful lot of that in various treatment centres and things like that, but I've come to believe that if I work on my behaviour, then my past is discharged, my today is secure, and my tomorrow is assured. And that's a very comfortable place to be, very comfortable. And it goes along the lines of there's a lot of love in there somewhere or other that is a bit difficult to define. But I remember, as far as Seamus is concerned, is why he mattered so much to me was that I also came to believe that if you will help me and you will heal me, first you must touch my heart, because you're going nowhere unless you can get there. And he could do that. He could do that because he was so other-centered, and he taught me to love. And I think that ability to love that was missing in my life for so long contributes enormously to my peace of mind today, and to be other-centered, which is unbelievable in a way. But the trouble with my addiction was that I became so self-centered that I didn't know what it was like to be other-centered. And today I can be other-centered, and I do seriously, thank goodness, usually look at all aspects of situations before making my mind up, and it doesn't get much better than that. And so, I mean, my days are numbered now because I'm 86 years old, but it's been a good run. It's in a little while now, it'll be 50 years since I had a drink, and that's a long time. That's a long time. It's no claim to fame. They always say, if you're sober today, you're a winner. Well, that's true. That's true. So, but they also say that we're just all as close to our next drink as each other, you know. So that's true also. And I think I'll probably be all right. I think I'll probably be all right. Well, I'd like to think so. Yeah. When I was young, there was a family business and everything, and I was involved. My father felt that it was a better idea if I got a job elsewhere and got some more experience outside. And I applied for various jobs, and one interview I went to, and I went for this interview, and anyway, the interview kicked off. I can't even remember what the job was for now. And the guy said, you know, what sort of training have you had? And I said, well, I haven't actually had any training, but I have a presence with people, and I can get on with people, and I can convince them of various aspects of what it is that I'm trying to convince them of, and things like that. He said, yeah, okay. He said, look, don't let's waste each other's time here. You're not getting the job. And I said, so he said, look, I'm not being unkind. He said, but you haven't had any training. He said, so try and look at it this way. He said, if you, at 15 years of age, were a very talented footballer, and you're a very talented ball player and everything like that, and you joined Liverpool Academy for 15-year-olds and one thing and another, what's the first thing they're going to do to you? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, they're going to show you where to kick the ball. That's what they're going to do. They're going to show you where to kick the ball. Because if you don't know where to kick the ball, all the talent in the world is useless. All the talent. And I never forgot that. I never forgot that. So all those years later, when I was involved with the world of addiction and things like that, when I was young and starting in this business, I suppose, you used to be able to get in without any qualifications or anything like that, or without any training. And I knew, because since then, of course, I've interviewed many counsellors and things like that, and I've always looked for three things. I call them 3 C's: competence, commitment, and charisma. You need all 3 to be a good counsellor. Or any 2 won't do. I had charisma, I knew that. I knew that part was all right. And I knew I was competent as well. Commitment, yeah, sorry, the other way around. Commitment, I was okay with that, but competence, I didn't really know where to kick the ball. I didn't know where to kick the ball. So I had to take on some training. So the clinic, they paid for me to go to conferences and all that sort of thing. And I took on a training program in North America with total abstinence programs, to be a program director, so that I could come back and start looking for jobs and things like that. And so that's exactly what happened. I got some training under my belt, and I came back and I started looking for jobs. You remember I explained that lovely feeling I experienced when I used to visit the clinic that I was in myself, going back to talk to the patients. that feeling of fulfillment that I felt when I left there every time. And now I was starting to be on the threshold of feeling that way on a daily basis, because I was going to work with people who were suffering. In fact, they were primary patients and everything. And so I was offered this job as the senior counsellor of Galsworthy Manor in those days, and that took off, and it was the most rewarding couple of years of my life, really, and because I knew that I had a part to play in getting people well, and I could see the evidence right in front of me that some of the stuff that I was doing was making a difference. And I never ever had that experience before, because I always felt so inadequate and so second-hand in everything that I'd ever attempted and everything. And but now there was something that meant something which had a real value to it. And I know that to be true because they all told me so. They all told me so. That wasn't me making the decision that I was being successful. It was the patients who were telling me how grateful they were for my input and everything. And so I worked with that for quite a long time. I also ran the aftercare for the treatment centres and everything, and which became massive in the end. And the queues were mild. I had to have it 2 nights a week. There were so many people coming back to the aftercare after primary treatment and everything. And but I still, the money was absolutely rubbish, so I wanted to do better. And so I decided I was going to try and do better. To cut a long story short, I started to apply for other jobs in there, and I was offered a job in Charter Medical. They had a clinic in Radnor Walk in London, and they had one in Fellows Road in North London, and the Liston Grove Nightingale Hospital, and I eventually got the jobs of running the addiction programs for all those 3 hospitals. And so I was flying. I was really flying, and I was feeling so comfortable about myself. But I absolutely made certain, with Seamus, I have to say, and he was a very calming influence on me, that I wasn't going to get out of hand and let my ego take over or anything like that. I just wanted to say, this is the way it is, this is good, and this is better than it's ever been. And I have to accept certain things when they don't suit me. And that was one of the biggest things that I had to change, is that I was always pretty resentful towards other situations and people and things like that. And I've learned, with Seamus's help, to be more along the lines of live and let live. But then money cropped up and rode on to the ranch, and I decided that I needed more money. And because I developed such a very strong background of patients that I've been in touch with over the years, right, I felt that if I started on my own, some of them would come and see me for counselling purposes. And so I thought about it, and then I did the arithmetic, and I could work out that I could earn more in 2 days working privately with people than I could in a whole week working for somebody else. And so I was nervous about changing from being employed to being self-employed. And so I went to see 2 people. One chap was a fellow called Stanley Gitlow. He was a psychiatrist at Mount Sinai School in New York. And I went to see him because I'd had a lot of respect for a lot of the work that he'd been doing in my world of addiction and things like that. And I told him my dilemma that, you know, shall I, shan't I, shall I start on my own and things like that. And he said, I tell you simply, throw the dice. He said, throw the dice. He said, you'll either come up with boxcars or snake eyes, but if you don't throw the dice, you have to live with cowardice. So he said, throw the dice. He said, what you got to lose? He says, there's plenty more jobs out there if it doesn't work out. I thought, well, that's good advice. That's what I wanted him to say, to be honest with you. And then I went to see another chap here in London, Harley Street, who was an industrial counsellor, psychologist, really. And he said, okay. He said, I'll tell you what to do. He said, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? No, he said, how old are you, first of all? And so I told him. He said, fine. He said, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? I said, well, I'd like to be running my own counselling business and anything else that spins off that. And he said, fine, okay. He said, where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And I said, well, probably much the same, but probably get a few people working for me or something like that. And I said, fine. He said, well, here's the way you're going to do it, right? He said, instead of working out what you've got to do to achieve your aims, he said, I want you to work out what's going to prevent you from achieving your aims. He said, because on your journey from here to where you want to be, he said, you're going to get a lot of offers. He said, people are going to come along and they're going to say, we've got this treatment centre starting, we've got this, they're going to be coming to you and they're going to offer you all sorts of things. And he said, a lot of them will be attractive. And he said, and if you go for them, then it'll stop you from getting for where you want to be. And he said, because the good is all too often the enemy of the best. And he said, so instead of working out how you've got to get there, you've got to work out what's going to get in the way. And that's what will get in the way because of your reputation and everything. You're going to get a lot of offers on the way, and that's going to slow you down. And he was right. He was dead right. And I had to turn down lots of stuff. It sounds a bit arrogant, me talking like this. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I had a part to play in all this. And so I did, and I persevered, and my private counselling stuff rocketed away, and I was working really hard. When I was away at boarding school, the current headmaster, not the one I had, but the current headmaster heard that I was working with the Priory group and with the various people like that, and he called me one day and asked me if I knew anybody that could speak to the boys on alcohol. And I said, yeah, well, I'll ask around and see if I can find anybody. So I asked around the Priory and various other places, and I couldn't find anybody. And I thought, well, I could do that. I could do a talk on alcohol. And so I chatted to him, and I said, look, I can do that. It's part of my stuff and everything. And he said, let's do it. So we put it together, and I did a talk to the school on alcohol and alcoholism and things, and it went really well. It went really well. It was just only a 1 hour presentation, but it went really well with lots of questions and things like that. And I thought, God, I really like this. This is valuable. So I thought, yeah, I'll approach some more schools. Well, of course, the first question all the other schools asked was, where have you been? And of course, I hadn't been anywhere. I'd only been to one school. And so it had a very slow start, but then occasionally, then you get a booking. And before I knew where I was, then people were starting to talk, and then the phone would start ringing. And now all of a sudden I became a lecturer to schools on alcoholism, and so that was going really well, and I sort of fell up the ladder in a way, because it changed my life completely, because it was yet again so fulfilling. So they would say to me, have you got anybody that could speak on eating disorders? Have you got anybody that could speak on drugs? Have you got anybody that can speak on all sorts of different things? And so over the years, my business grew and grew and grew. And I remember, well, because I didn't take any prisoners as far as that was concerned. I used to say to people, don't take me for a fool. I'm not a fool. So don't you take me for a fool. I know what I'm talking about here. So we talk to schools, right? I can talk to 120 boys or girls in a sixth form, and I say to them, whether or not you like it, round about 12 of you people sitting in this audience today are going to become alcoholics. And then you'll burst out laughing, oh, it's going to be Darren, it's going to be Charlotte, it's going to be Christine, it's going to be so-and-so, so-and-so. And there's all the laughing and joking and everything. And I say, at this stage, I've borrowed a line from John le Carré's Rush House, and he says that the line between actually very funny and actually very serious is actually very thin. You see, because what I've just told you is this. Around about 12 of you in this audience today are going to have your lives completely and utterly ruined by booze, to the total exclusion of everything else that is important to most people: families, friends, jobs, careers. Alcohol for you people is going to become the governing force and the prime reality in your lives, to the total exclusion of everything else. Then there's silence, you see. Now I've got them listening, you know, and then I can put the meat into the presentation and draw out these examples that you and I know so well about what goes on. And that took off really well, and I did that for many, many years, and I had to stop in the end because I just got too old, and I was a grandfather really, and so I've had to employ other people younger that could connect better with that age group. And so today I have 45 speakers going around the country talking to schools on all that sort of thing, and it's taken a bit of a bashing with this COVID and everything, but I mean it's been a wonderful story really, and so we come to a point in the end where you ask in the end of your questionnaire, you ask about, what do I want to leave behind? What are my expectations? Well, there's not a lot left for me, really. There's not a lot left. So I usually make people smile and say, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't gamble, I don't smoke, I don't do marriages, right? I don't do relationships, right? And some say, you know, maybe I'm only staying alive to see what happens next. And we have a little bit of a laugh over that. But I just hope I stay alive long enough to be around when some newcomer's sitting up there in front of a crowd with a sparkle in their eye, and they're saying, keep coming back because it's all worthwhile. And that's how I would finish it. Are you with me? Is passing that message on.